Welcome to the Fundamentals of Christianity. My name is Dan Odom. Thank you for joining us today. If you're new, I would like to ask you to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Click on the bell for notifications. That way you will be updated and notified when we upload a new video. This is part 2 of our study on the purpose of problems. In lesson 1, we looked at the meaning of affliction scripturally, what affliction means, problems and affliction means. And we also looked at what God brings about through that affliction, through those problems. Well, today we would like to continue that study and learn and to look at the second lesson that God would have for us concerning the purpose of problems. Today's lesson will be the cause of affliction. What is the cause of affliction? Here are the scripture verses that we looked at last time and that we will be revisiting today. Psalm 119 and verse 67, "Before I was afflicted, I went astray, but now have I kept thy word." Second scripture verse, "It is good for me that I have been afflicted, that I might learn thy statutes." Third scripture, "I know, O Lord, that thy judgments are right, and that thou in faithfulness hast afflicted me." The fourth scripture, "I am afflicted very much. Quicken me, O Lord, unto thy word." In the first lesson, again, we studied these 4 verses, and we saw 4 things that God is bringing about in the middle of our affliction, what God is working in, what God is doing in the middle of our affliction. We learned that the word affliction means to depress, to put down, to abase. It has the idea of any circumstance that is difficult for us to handle, something that is unexpected, something that surprises us, something that is hard for us to bear. And so with that thought in mind, we will continue to look at the cause of affliction. What causes affliction in our life? The first aspect that I would like for you to consider, the first principle, is that God is authoring the affliction. God is behind it. Listen to Psalm 119:75. "I know, O Lord, that thy judgments are right, and that thou in faithfulness hast afflicted me." Notice that David says that God has afflicted him. God brought about whatever the problem is that David is facing. God brought this affliction into his life. Now, I know sometimes that's a very hard thing for us to grasp. That's a hard thing for us to understand. But there's 2 examples in Scripture where we see God bringing affliction, problems, something very hard for someone to handle into their life. The first is Jonah and the well. Now, we know that Jonah was given a command by God to go to Nineveh. Jonah ran from the Lord. And so God sent a storm, and eventually Jonah was thrown over into the sea. Now, Jonah was swallowed by the whale. Now, that was an affliction that God brought. Now, we know that because of Jonah's sin, Jonah went through that. But who brought those issues into his life? Well, God was the one behind it. I think of Paul and the thorn in the flesh. God gave Paul that thorn in the flesh. That was an affliction that God authored. Okay? God was behind it. Listen, sometimes there's afflictions that God is behind. And that's okay, because God is working. The second cause of affliction is simply that God is allowing the affliction. Psalm 119:107, "I am afflicted very much. Quicken me, O Lord, according unto thy word." See, in the previous verse, David says, "Yes, God, you've afflicted me." But here, David says, "Lord, listen, I'm afflicted and I need you to do something. I need you to help me." A couple of examples in the Bible where this happens. One is Joseph. When Joseph was sold into slavery, sold into Egypt, God wasn't behind that, but God used that. God had a purpose and a plan in allowing it to happen. I look at the man named Job. God wasn't behind the affliction that Job went through. Satan was working there. But what happened? God allowed Satan to work. Both of these circumstances and these situations, whether God is authoring it or whether God is allowing it. Teaches us and within these principles, a very powerful and important truth, and that truth is this, is that God is active in my affliction. Psalm 119:67, before I was afflicted, I went astray, but now have I kept thy word. What was God doing? God was active in the affliction in David's life. He was bringing about a change in David. Psalm 119:71, it is good for me that I have been afflicted, that I might learn thy statutes. Again, we don't know, did God bring this into his life? Or is he authoring it? Is he allowing it? Well, David doesn't go into a lot of detail. Well, in verse 67, it appears that God brought it because David was in sin. But we don't know everything happening in it. David just simply says, I am afflicted and God is working. I don't know what you're going through. I don't know what affliction. I don't know what is bringing you down. I don't know what has depressed you. Maybe you battled depression. I don't know. But take comfort in heart in knowing that God is active. Maybe God brought it into your life and he is the author behind it. Or maybe God is allowing it. But I do know this, that God is the author, or that he is active in it, rather. He's working. He is working for his glory and for your good. As you live for the Lord, as you walk with him, let me encourage you. Stay faithful to God. Keep resting and relying upon him. Allow his word to strengthen you. Thank you for joining us here today at the Fundamentals of Christianity. May the Lord bless you and prosper you in your walk with the Lord.